Hey y'all, welcome and welcome back. Literally everything that can go wrong is. Literally, okay, I'm filming this at the same time as last videos. Obviously, I'm wearing the same thing that you saw yesterday. It was only one story long because things kept going wrong. I am now losing my voice. I've already tried to film this once. My cats are going crazy. It is so much, and I'm gonna try my best to get through this, but like I said, I am starting to lose my voice, so I don't know what to do. But anyways, if you're new here, my name is Morgan, and here we do all things spooky, but this month specifically, we are just reading stories that you guys send in to me, and sometimes they come with paranormal activity. It has happened consistently since I started doing this every day this month. It's fine, we deal with it, and we move on with it. But if you have any stories you would like to send for me to read, please check out the description below. It'll have that email address and everything there. Also, it has my other social medias and my very first podcast episode there as well. So please go check that out. Anyways, let's get on into these stories before something else bad happens. I'm telling you, I have one more bad thing left to me, and then we're just calling it a day because this takes place in Marydale, Delaware, about a 5-minute drive from the state border to Maryland. I was living in a camper on my parents' property. Every so often, I'd hear things outside at night that I couldn't quite explain, ranging from the movement to strange sounds and even voices. This was perhaps one of the sounds that I'd experienced that especially stand out most to me, as I was able to comfortably guess what everything else could have been. The sound was a flute. It sounded smooth, and I pictured a wooden flute when I imagined the instrument might have looked like. It would pass by my camper twice in slow and relaxed paces. In other scenarios, it might have been a lovely sound, but this was different because it happened in a rural area during late night at around 2 to 4 in the morning. And at first, I thought I was hallucinating, but eventually I got a cat and she also heard it. Plus, I lived with a friend at the time, and he heard it too. One night, my friend and I were sitting in the camper. It was late at around 2 or 3 in the morning, and we were talking and laughing. My cat was sleeping nearby, and it was quiet, as most nights were. Then we heard the flutes again. My friend and I had heard them so many times before that we felt mostly at ease about it. We were laughing and joking about what it could be. I suggested it might have been Pied Piper. Then my friend said, "He grants wishes, right?" And I told him, "Yeah, but for a price." Then my friend made a joke. "Like what, my firstborn child? Good luck, I'm not having kids," and offhandedly said at that rate he'd never get paid. Naturally, I knew based on the stories that not paying the piper was a bad idea. But I thought since it wasn't likely that this flute was actually the Pied Piper, that is until the flute stopped. They'd never stopped before. They'd always fade into hearing range across the next camper, turn and pass the other direction, and fade out. This time they were next to the camper and stopped, suddenly and abruptly. Being frightened, I said to my friend, "Apologize. Tell him you weren't serious. Tell him you have no wish to make." My friend, who seemed as freaked out, said, "I meant no harm. Please leave." Then the flute started again, only this time they were on the other side of the camper, as if whatever it was had circled the camper in silence, which shouldn't have been possible because the ground was covered in leaves. It was loud, too. We both jumped at the sudden music, which was now positioned behind us. My cat sat up from her sleeping and looked in the direction of the sound. Then we felt the camper being shook. We could hear noises like scratching, and thus almost like something was on the roof. Something big. Naturally, we were worried that the roof might cave in. This thing, whatever it was right above us. The flutes had stopped. We were freaking out, and my cat was hiding. After maybe half an hour of this thing jumped off the camper, causing no one more shake. The flute started again. They circled around the end of the camper, down the driveway, until they faded out like they did every time. That night, when I finally did fall asleep, I had a weird dream. Not sure if it's related or just my imagination being out of hand, but I'll include it here. In this dream, I was in sort of a cabin, and I heard flutes. I drew back the curtains, and there was a man standing outside. He was holding a long pole-like thing with something at the top, which I could only guess to be a speaker of some kind. The man looked native and looked as if he were half-rotted. He wore a deer skull with antlers on his head, and it covered his face in shadows. He looked at me, and his stick made a noise, which was why I believed the thing at the top of the stick to be a speaker. The stick mimicked a woman crying for help. I recognized the sound because I'd heard it in the woods a week or so prior. He continued mimicking sounds of distressed people and even some people I knew. Eventually, I woke up. The next morning, I asked my parents if they'd heard anything the previous night, and they said no and asked what I meant. I told them that something was on the camper roof. It was very big. My dad said there had been rumors of mountain lions prowling the area, saying it could have been that, but I don't think so. After all, mountain lions can't play flutes, can they? I told my sister about the flutes, and she said, "I've heard them too. They pass by twice between 2 and 4 in the morning." For context on the detail in my dream that I mentioned, my friend and I had been walking to the store nearby, and we were passing a stretch of woods. We'd always felt a sort of pull to enter the woods, but we would get this weird feeling too, like if we went, we'd never come back out. The sky was dark. It was maybe 6 p.m., and there was a sudden scream in the woods. It was a woman. She sounded like she was being attacked or perhaps hurt. She was screaming, "Help me! Please, help!" Suspecting the sound to not be human in origin, we'd both had similar things happen in that area before. We bolted. At first, I didn't know about the leave calmly rule. We could hear the sounds following us. We both felt this feeling that either of us could only describe as the feeling of being hunted, like prey. I'm honestly surprised we even made it to the store alive, let alone back home, but we did. To this day, I don't know what this was. If you or your followers can offer any of the theories, I would be so grateful. Yeah, I think everything is coming from a situation of something in the woods. The only thing that weirds me out was the flute playing stopping, which I guess could coincide with you acknowledging it. But yeah, that's creepy. I don't like that. I would put up some iron stakes right outside of your property and try to ignore all the sounds you hear, because obviously direct acknowledgement's not ending well. But I think your dream might have been trying to warn you that it was definitely something in the woods. All right, next story. I've already sent you 3 of my experiences. Hi, I'm the girl from Italy. But as I tell you more things, I start to remember more things that happened to me. I think I commented 1 or 2 of these stories on one of your TikToks before, but I'm gonna send them to you again. This time we have some spooky stuff that is actually wholesome, and some that I frankly can't explain. Buckle up, because this is gonna be a long one. And each little story is named. Okay, the first little story is Charlie and the Dead Nun. This all started while I was in middle school, and I was going to a Catholic school. It was very chill and not all uptight, so my classmates were on the Charlie trip. They decided to play in the middle of the classroom during lunch break. Everyone was somewhat invested, except for this one girl who just rolled her eyes and declared that it was stupid to believe in ghosts. So the rest of us are playing Charlie and nothing happens. Time's running out, so the last thing we requested was that if he was here, he should show us a sign. Nothing happens. Class starts, and around 5 minutes in, suddenly there is a loud click, and all the lights go out. All the lights except for the one above the girl. Let's call her C. C is totally unimpressed while all of us are freaking out. The teacher calms us down and tries to get the lights to turn on, but nothing she did worked. The rest of the day the lights were off except for the one above C. Now the next story happened in the same school, in the same month, only a few weeks apart. One of the few nuns passed away. With her passing, weird stuff started happening. The bell to signal us the end of the period was somewhat broken and either didn't work or worked randomly. But the weirdest part is the convent bell. The church bell didn't work. It took mechanics about 2 months until the bell was working again. I don't know if both things are related, but they were really spooky. My Imaginary Friend is the title of the next little story. This one is really strange, especially because I can only remember one instance with him, Dua. He was my imaginary friend, or at least that's what my parents told me. He was a grown adult man. He had short brown hair, I think, and he would wear blue jeans and a purplish polo shirt. I was in kindergarten when I saw him, and oh boy, he went out with a bang. As far as I remember, he would mostly visit me in my dreams. At first, he was nice and protective, but the older I got, it would turn into possessive. He would get angry at me for even acknowledging others. The last time he visited me in my dream, we were having a big fight. We were in some kind of house or apartment, and he got so angry at me that I was playing with this one boy. He scared me. I remember bolting at some point during the fight and running up the stairs. He was chasing me with an axe. The only thing I know for certain is that he gained on me and grabbed me. That's when I woke up. I was crying and my back hurt a lot. I've never seen him again, thankfully. If you have any idea what he was, please tell me. Also, I just spoke to my mother and asked her about it. She told me that I normally wouldn't talk to him, but I would tell her stories about him and what he did. She said we should talk to my father about it. Maybe he remembers some. And that she would also help me look through old drawings. Maybe I depicted him somewhere. Sounds like Dua was an attachment. Ooh. Oh. The next little story they sent. I'm sorry, Bloody Mary. Bloody Mary stories and me do not get along. I am so scared of them. So this is going to be interesting. Oh my god, it's long too. Oh, I'm going to have a heart attack. Okay. Alright, this one's a bit strange and makes no real sense, except that it happened that way. This takes place when I was in middle school. It started off fine. I was selected for a project with other kids from middle school. We had to hike to this place in the middle of the woods. We stayed there for 2 days. Again, it was me, a girl from my class, and at least 18 other random students from all over the region where I live. That night, the girls stayed up and had made a plan to call Bloody Mary in the bathroom mirror. I was like, you guys go ahead. I am staying out of this one. Anyways, I go to sleep and the girls stay up. At 3 a.m., they collectively went to the bathroom. I woke up from the rustling and I couldn't fall back asleep because there was this bad feeling. They did their thing and eventually came out of the bathroom disappointed. I was still having this bad feeling and couldn't fall back asleep. So I waited until they were asleep. I don't know if this was smart what I did next. I silently stood up and went to the bathroom mirror. The mirror to my back, I sat down on the floor, crossed my legs, and closed my eyes. Then I started to repeat over and over again that I'm sorry for their behavior. I'm sorry if they disturbed her rest. So I'm sitting there in the dark alone, and I keep apologizing and apologizing. At some point, the dark and uncomfortable air lifted, and I felt bone dead tired. So I went to bed and fell asleep. The next morning, the other girls kept talking about how disappointed they were. I was sitting next to them feeling drained. A bit later that same day, one of the particularly feral cats that live in the property came to me and just curled up in my lap. Now this is crazy. The owners of that property saw that and were amazed that the cat seemed to like me because he didn't like anyone. They told me the cat's name, Mary. The next little story is titled My Grandfather's Goodbye. The story didn't happen to me, but to my mother, who's also a believer and somewhat sensitive to things. She often tells me the story of when her father died, I think at 2 a.m. She woke up because she felt somehow someone was brushing her cheek, and she felt a soft kiss on her forehead. She knew that her father had passed away. Later on, her sister and my mother were talking, and it turns out that almost the exact same thing happened to her. This one's really sweet, and I started crying while writing this one down. Oh. The next one is my cat dying. The story makes no real sense, and it mostly is my feelings and vibes that I picked up along the way. So the cat I'm talking about was technically my sister's cat. Her name was Lily. She was something special and was very particular about who was allowed to touch her and who wasn't. Anyways, in September, she had her last checkup at the vet, and they did all kinds of tests, but everything was clear. At the beginning of October, she had trouble eating, and things got weird. Turns out she had a very aggressive tumor in her stomach. It grew to the size of an adult's fist in less than 3 weeks, and she was to be put down on the 31st of October. I remember before talking to Lord Lucifer and wanting to cry. I knew that she would not make it, and I asked of him to not leave her side during her process of passing because she would be alone. The vet had planned to try to remove the tumor if possible, and if there was no option, to put her down on the operating table, so she would have been all alone. I was bawling my eyes out, much like right now while I'm writing this. In the morning, I said my goodbye, and I remember telling her that she would not be alone. I was petting her while she was lying in a sunny spot on my sister's bed. Suddenly, I could feel someone petting my head and laying a hand on my shoulder. Lily lifted her head and looked over my shoulder, and I knew he was standing there. I started to cry and told her that yes, he would be by her side the whole time, that I would send him and she did not need to be afraid of him. She started to purr at those words. Later that morning, I could feel my stomach drop suddenly, so I lit the candle on Lord Lucifer's altar. It started to flicker wildly, and I just knew she'd passed away with him by her side. Sometimes I could still hear the clicking of her nails under my bed, or that she's messing with one of my scented candles, giving me her typical attitude. Next little story. The Creature in the Woods. Alright, enough crying. Back to the creepy stuff. This one happened maybe 2 years ago, and I'm not sure if this one really happened because I was watching a lot of Teen Wolf at the time, but something tells me this was not my imagination. So it's nighttime and I'm sitting on my bed looking out of my window. Suddenly I felt uneasy. I looked down into the path leading into the woods that is like 20 meters away from my house. I could see a tall, bony, dark figure walking up the path. It was hunched over on all fours, and there were random patches of fur sticking out all over. It didn't look like a real animal, and there's no way in hell it was a wolf or a bear because neither exist in my area. It was too bulky and muscular for a deer to. Suddenly this thing stops. I get scared and hide beneath the windowsill. Curiosity gets the best of me after waiting for 30 seconds, and I lift my head to look out. I can see it sprinting into the woods still on all fours. These are the same woods from my last email with the scary man made out of wax. I know I have no idea what was going on, so it'd be cool to know if you have any idea. Sounds like that was one of the creatures that lives in the woods. That's what that sounds like to me. Maybe it was a werewolf. If it was, hopefully it was Tyler Hoechlin, because Derek was always my number one in that show. Next little story. Not being able to breathe while touching salt. So this one happened while I was watching one of your videos. I was cooking and I needed to put salt in boiling water to make pasta. Everything is normal until I touch the salt. Suddenly I can't breathe. Literally no oxygen is getting into my lungs. As soon as I let go of the salt container, I can breathe normally. I touch it again and I can't breathe. I let go and I can breathe. So me being me, I make a voice message to my friend and she is freaking out while I find this hilarious. I start to experiment with it, so I pause your video and touch the salt and suddenly everything's fine. I don't know what happened there, but I found it hilarious, so there's that. I still have a ton of stories that I need to look at my old drawings. If you want more, let me know. If you want, I can get into my visions on how I found out that the deity I'm working with is Lord Lucifer. I'm still not sure, but everything is calm and I'm feeling good, so I'm calling him Lord Lucifer for now. I love your content and I love your cats. Best wishes from Italy. I would love to hear more stories. Oh my gosh. The salt one's wild. What? Salt usually gets rid of bad energy. Were you the bad energy in that moment? I'm just playing. Alright, next story. Hi Morgan, I hope this can make it into your 28 days of spooky stories. You're here! If not, no worries, as long as someone else knows this crazy stuff that's happened. I know it's kind of all over the place, but the last and most recent one who has left me so confused for years now. I'd really like your feedback on whatever you think happened to my spirit friend and on what caused this last event. Growing up, my family was super involved in the local spiritual community, but I didn't have many paranormal scares up until we moved away from that part of the state and further into the South. Even though they started as young as 6, I remember every experience I've had with a really strange clarity given my horrible memory. My experiences started with a reoccurring dream from age 4 to 5. It would always take place on this specific part of the highway we used to frequent as time's gone on, and I've researched and I found that this dream was likely a vision of something that happened around the time I was born. This is how it goes. I'm a scruffy man in a red flannel driving a well-loved maroon SUV at exactly 10:43 p.m. There's quiet music playing and I can't make it out. The windshield is dewy from the rain and the highway's practically empty. I drive for a few minutes before getting slammed in from behind and launched off the side of the highway. I remember the fall and crash until I hit my head on impact and wake up confused but not upset. This dream went away after I moved. The next place I lived was on a huge farm. Me and my mom rented half of the barn. Our apartment had no walls except for the bathroom, which was in the middle of the hall between the entryway and my room, and my mom's room and kitchen. It was kind of telephone shaped. In this place, I would see ghosts pacing the hall constantly, all dressed in various forms of armor and old military outfits. There was a Russian man, a revolutionary soldier, a Mongolian dressed in huge armor, and simply dressed Native American man. I always felt safe around them and didn't do anything but pace and stand by the front door and stare. Nothing of note happened in this house until I stopped seeing these ghosts. I don't know why, but one day they all left, and a few weeks later, while playing with my toys after I was supposed to be asleep, my mom was watching her show in the bed. I blacked out and only remember the feeling of being pressed in on all sides before I came to. I came to standing in the pitch black, screaming and crying, not knowing where I was. My mom called for me several times asking where I was, and I cried harder. Not even a minute later, she bursts into the bathroom and finds me stuck between the pedestal sink and the wall, with bruises like fingerprints all over my arms. I forgot this for years, and I still have no explanation. We moved shortly after, and I didn't have any more experiences for a few years. When I was 14, late 2020, I'd been sitting on the floor of my room in my house. My mom's currently getting demolished. I was an avid artist and had chucked over a dozen of crumpled paper balls on the floor while drawing. It was the middle of cleaning them up. My waistband was tiny, and it was piled high with balls of paper I'd yet to squish down. I remember leaning back against my bed and feeling heavy and disoriented. I blinked and it felt like I was moving through molasses. The whole house was silent. I had cotton in my ears and breathing was difficult. As I panicked, a strangely dressed, totally solid-looking, really old man walked and floated into my room. The energy was like nothing I've ever experienced. His robe was tattered and frayed in layers, and he had long, scraggly gray hair and even a longer beard braided down his front. In his hands, he held a huge, really detailed tree candle with no leaves, with his own face on the front. He might have been chanting, but I could only hear and feel vibrations like his voice was in my bones. He leaned down and sat on the waistband on fire and stepped back and watched as I tried to scream. It was like every ounce of effort I had into the scream, only for breathlessness, tiny wheezes to escape. I knew my stepsister was in the kitchen doing dishes and my mom was watching TV, but I couldn't move or shout. I watched as the room went up in flames. When I fell over sideways and woke up with my room fine and all of the sound back to normal. I have no idea what that man was, and I've never seen or experienced something like that again, but it totally freaked me out. Jesus. I don't know. That's terrifying, though. Oh my god. Okay, next story, and this is a continuation from another story that I was already sent. I hope you're doing well. It's Yasmin again, and I have more stories to tell you. If you wish to put my name in the video, I don't mind. I'm the rebellious teen that decided that it was a good idea to look into the graveyard near my house and saw a woman in a white dress. This continues from there. I remember you. Oh, that one was rough. This will all seem fictional, but it is completely true, so stay with me. Oh, I'm with you. After the events in the story I sent before, I began to see that woman everywhere. A white figure in the corner of my eye, in my nightmares, sat just behind a relative so I would only see her eyes. She was a constant figure in my dreams and daily life. I was unnerved by her, but not truly scared, as if some part of me knew that she wasn't there to do harm, just teach me something. After a year or so, I found out who the spirit truly was through some sleuthing of the area, the local legends, and my mom's uncanny ability to apparently see and speak to the dead. The woman in the white dress was a legend that even elders of the area knew, a phantom that haunted the ground of the cemetery that was from my previous story. It goes back to an old story in the area of witch trials that weren't sanctioned by any authority of any kind, but the locals there were fearful at the time. They weren't even documented, just deaths caused by accidents or illnesses. Considering that town had 6 churches built between both Catholics and Protestants at the time, it doesn't surprise me that there had been religious campaigns going on in that area. The woman in white, also known as Lady Death, was said to be a witch that had been hung from a tree on the hill where the cemetery was later built on a church built in the middle. Despite the rules that my mother had drilled into our heads and the fact that I was a rebellious teen, I still played in the woods in the cemetery and climbed the tree that was almost as old as the cemetery itself. One of the said trees in the middle small woods of the cemetery was always without leaves. It had grown in a twisted S. The bark of it is sickly pale gray. It was old and big, and my friends and I believed that it was dead, but it still grew. The tree was the only tree that I had ever fallen out of. It was because of this that I had one of the worst experiences of my life. My mom's nickname for me was Monkey because I climbed everything I could. I was hanging around with my group of friends at the time, and we were climbing and messing around in the trees when I had this feeling of being watched. I was sat about 15 feet in the air on a branch of the twisted tree, and we were surrounded by nothing but trees. I tried to ignore it as best as I could. I began to feel more and more paranoid that someone was out there trying to get me. The more I ignored it, the worse I began to feel. Breathless, lightheaded, but with pressure in my skull and a tight chest. I decided it was time to get out of that tree, and as I began to shift across the branch I sat on, I heard the sound of a rope suddenly pulling taut. Yet the branch was fine, and I ended up on my back on the ground, going in and out of consciousness, feeling as though I was being choked to death. After I managed to recover and began to head home, I looked back at the tree and sat on the branch was a woman in white. I never climbed or even went near that tree again because she wasn't there alone. There must have been about 12 other women and teenage girls, all watching me with those blank pits for eyes. I'm positive to this day that that tree was the tree that people were hung from and buried beneath. They were showing me that they were still there and that they couldn't rest. Witches were buried in unmarked graves away from hallowed, along with having their heads cut off and buried separately. After I got home, my mom ensured I didn't need to go to the hospital. She was medically trained, and I told her about the woman in white, and she knew who she was. The woman in white, or Lady Death, was named Annabelle. She was a young woman who was said to be a witch that cursed a farmer's wife as revenge for something he did. After that, I talked to her every time I went through the cemetery in the day, but still avoided at night. I'll send in more, but I began talking about my experiences with my partner as I was writing the third story and began to feel ill, so I'll send another in soon. Keep up the good work. No, poor Annabelle. Oh, that makes me sad. So she's literally she doesn't have her head. I get really emotional about witch trial stuff. I really do. Oh my god. Well, on that note, on that very sad note and scary note, we will cap this story for today. Thank you guys so much for hanging out with me. I'm glad nothing else went wrong and I could actually get a video good for you guys. I'm sorry yesterday's was only one story, but it was the Bell Witch Cave, so I mean, you can't be too mad. That's like the best haunting ever. But thank you guys so much for hanging out with me, and I will see you tomorrow.